Prohibition. Definitely not roaring. How can you have a roaring good time without alcohol? Congress passes the Prohibition Amendment. Prohibition makes it a crime to make, distribute, and sell alcohol. Not to drink it. It was never illegal to drink it. And so a lot of people made their own, and they consumed it readily, and the federal government would close down these underground bars or taverns or places where people would drink. Once again, how can you have a roaring good time without alcohol? I'm not sure. I guess it's possible. Some people do. When I was in my 20s, I certainly would not have thought that to be true. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. Ooh, okay. Suffrage. I guess this is something that's roaring. This is really good. This is really important. The male voting electorate in this country finally decides to give women political equality, and women are deemed to be citizens. Yes, women were not considered citizens until the adoption of the 19th Amendment. Women will work hard and long for this, beginning, I guess officially, with the convention in Seneca Falls in 1848. So this would be one good thing that happened in the 1920s. Oh, the baseball scandal. They were known as the Chicago Black Sox. They threw the championship in 1919. Members of the White Sox took money to lose, and so the trial was in 1920. This absolutely shocked the nation, and baseball was America's pastime. Baseball had been this truly Americana game. Baseball had rules that were unlike anything else. It had rules that were, well, that were very moral, that were very family-oriented. I mean, look at the goal. What is the goal in baseball? To reach home. What a lovely metaphor. Who doesn't want to go home? And the field is set up as a diamond. Diamonds are kind of nice to have. They are, as the saying goes, a girl's best friend. And the lines, the left field, the right field line, they go on forever. There's no end to them. And how long does a game last? Well, yes, 9 innings, but there's no time limit. My God, that game can go on and on and on. Tremendous bang for your buck. So, the baseball scandal absolutely rocked Americans in 1920. Well, the federal government rounded up a lot of suspected communist radicals. They arrested these two guys, Sacco and Vanzetti, for murder. And the evidence against them was pretty lame, and as evidence collection over the decades became more of a science and less of a pseudoscience, it was finally determined that Sacco and Vanzetti did not do these horrible crimes, murder. And for the most part, they were arrested, they were found guilty, and they were sentenced to death, primarily because they were immigrants. They were Catholic and they were Italian. The International Workers of the World. This was a communist union. The IWW called for, first of all, there was tremendous membership in the IWW, very popular amongst the laboring class, which, the working class, we call them today, which is a euphemism for the poor. I mean, we're all working. I don't know anybody who's not in the working class. I don't know anybody who does not work. I guess the people who don't work would be the ones who, I don't know, won Powerball. But we're all working. So anyhow, the laborers all over the country joined the IWW, strikes all over this country, just crippling the nation's economy, and a lot of the radicalism, a lot of those literal bomb throwers, the Red Scare, they came from the ranks and the leadership of the IWW. Now, I wouldn't consider this a bad thing, one being from the military. There was required annual military training. I think that's important. I think it's important to be ready. But also keep this in mind. This is a period, the 1920s was a period in which we did not have a standing army. We had a couple thousand people in the military who were there primarily to direct and to train people when a national emergency or a war developed. Well, not today. Today we have a standing army. We have hundreds of thousands of men and women in the army. We're always training. But the idea in the 20s was we should be prepared for the next war, so there should be annual military training for all men. Oh, should we have a draft? That was an idea batted around in the 1920s. Should we not just have one training, or training once a year? Should we have training on a constant basis? And we do so by having a draft. A lot of people support the draft today. Anyhow, the American people were against the draft because their concern was if we have a draft, we'll have a standing army. If we have a standing army, we will use it. And we used our army in World War I, and it did not end well for us. Once again, we drew up the drawbridge and we created Fortress America. So things like military draft will not be palatable to Americans in the 1920s. I touched upon this, the bombings, the Red Scare, the IWW. This is a photograph of a bombing in front of Wall Street. When New Yorkers talked about terrorist attacks prior to September 11th, 2001, this is what they referred to. The terrorist attacks on the bombings of Wall Street in the 1920s. We had the Palmer raids. Attorney General Palmer had this new organization called the FBI, and the FBI didn't have evidence. Heavens no. They just simply busted down doors and broke into headquarters and offices of people who they suspected to be communist or socialist or just plain old radicals, un-American people. There was no warrant, there was no evidence, and this is what they did. Now, sometimes they got it right. Sometimes they were the bomb throwers. Sometimes they were the radicals. Sometimes they were the lawbreakers, but usually they weren't. Usually these were just people who belonged to unions. Not radicalized people. Certainly not terrorists. Oh, by the way, we still occupy part of Germany. Eventually we will settle the war and come to peace with Germany. However, the world does not trust Germany. So Germany is chopped up into different bits and pieces. England controls a part, France occupies part, other countries do, and the United States do. We will maintain, we will be an occupier of Germany until it becomes no longer economically viable. Not because we believe Germany has learned their lesson and they won't create a dictator and rise up and threaten the world again, because, spoiler alert, they do. It just becomes economically, and I would say also publicly, not viable. American people are wondering how long are we going to be punishing Germany. The White Army. I think I mentioned this before the end of World War I, we had already started our next war. We invaded Russia, along with a few other Western countries. Hence, we called ourselves the White Army. So, this is going to be one of the reasons why Americans feared a draft. Because if we have an army, we'll use it. We created an army to fight World War I, and what does President Wilson do? He launches a new war while we're still fighting World War I. Coal shortages. People heated their homes using coal. Almost nobody used fuel, petroleum, gasoline, some byproduct. The use on strike a lot in the 20s. And that's going to result in a lot of people, especially those up north, getting really nervous when they did not have enough coal to last the winter. Dairy prices. Well, dairy prices actually went down. The cost of a lot of consumer goods went down, which is really, really good for consumers. Horrible, horrible, horrible for farmers. And so every year, the price of dairy, the price of various farm goods would drop. So the next year, farmers would produce more milk, harvest more wheat, harvest more apples, whatever it was, to try to make up from the previous year's loss. Well, that would just result in a larger glut on the market, which would drop the price even more. Another problem was foreign goods coming into this country. So there was just a tremendous glut. There simply was more stuff to buy than people buying it. Really good for consumers, really bad, however, for people who, well, farm. And what farmers did, both because they had to and two to protest, is as, once again, here they are, they're dumping their milk. They can't even afford to have it travel to the store. Well, they do the same thing with cattle, with chickens, with pigs. They just slaughter them. They just leave them to die because they cannot afford to raise them. They cannot afford to butcher them. They cannot afford to send them to the stores to be sold because the price of cows, the price of chickens, the price of pork is dropping precipitously every year. The 20s is a horrible time to be a farmer. Good time to be a consumer. Oh, we had all sorts of scandals coming out of the White House. This was a time of laissez-faire, hands-off. Don't have any, quote, job-killing regulations. Allow business to do what business does best. Just leave them alone, and I'm sure they'll be nice. Well, of course that didn't happen. It didn't happen in the Gilded Age. It didn't happen in the Progressive Era. It did not happen in the 1920s. Historically, businesses will do much damage to the American economy and the American consumer and to the American workers when they're not regulated. Businesses need to be regulated historically, or they cause damage to the economy, they cause damage to workers. Well, Teapot Dome and other scandals are good examples. The Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of the Interior have this plan. And the plan is to extract oil from federal reserves. The Department of the Navy is going to take oil from oil that belongs to the Department of Interior. The oil in the land owned by the Department of Interior is public oil. That's public land, not private. So what the Navy Department is going to do is drill for that oil and use some of it for themselves and then sell some of it on the black market. The Department of Interior and Department of Navy will also sign secret contracts with some oil companies allowing them to drill on federal lands, oil that belongs to the American people. One of these examples is the oil company named Sinclair Oil, established by a guy named Harry Sinclair. Their old mascot used to be that big green dinosaur, the Brontosaurus. Well, there was lots of scandals. There was one involving the head of the VA, the Veterans Administration, in which he took bribes, in which he skimmed money. Money that was supposed to be used to help World War I veterans went into his pocket. Ooh, gangsters were on the rise. Gangsters were on the rise for a couple of reasons. One, the making of marijuana illegal and the making of alcohol illegal. Well, when you you make something illegal, you drive it underground. When you drive it underground, you drive up the price of the good. When you drive up the price of the good, there will be people interested in selling that good because they will make a lot of money. And so we have gangsters in general, or a certain type of gangster from Italy, particularly from Sicily, is the mafia. And there are Italian gangsters, there are Irish gangsters, there are German gangsters, and then they have their ethnic group. So there's a group of Italian mobsters, there's a group of all German mobsters, there's a group of all Irish mobsters. Sometimes they worked together, sometimes they didn't. This photo of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929 is an example of when the gangs did not work together. One gang simply attempted to assassinate the other. And they almost succeeded. Gangsters brought tremendous violence to this country. Before, quote, drive-by shootings became all the rage in the 80s and 90s, it was happening in the 20s. Except today, they have handguns. They, in the 20s, had automatic weapons. They had machine guns. And so when they shoot someone, they're spraying bullets all over a public sidewalk, and a lot of innocent bystanders are being killed. There were wars all over the world. Greece and Turkey were at war. The Irish Civil War, the Mexican Revolution, the Russian Revolution. There was war between Poland and Russia. There was war between France and Syria in the Middle East. There was war between Spain and Morocco, which is in northern Africa. There was the Adriatic War. Japan invades Korea. There's the Chinese Civil War. There's the Red Army versus the White Army in Russia. There's the Palestinian Civil War. There's the Nicaragua Civil War. This is just a few. The world is at war in the 1920s. The world is not a safe place, which is another reason why we pull up the drawbridge and create Fortress America. We do not want to be drawn into these and many other conflicts around the world.